Welcome to Speculative Sandbox, your audio playground for creative storytellers. My name is Vicky Lon, and in each episode, I and a guest will unpack a trope with an eye for world building, character development, or narrative structures. You can also join the conversation on TikTok and Instagram. For those times when the real world just doesn't cut it, let's get lost in a fictional one. Okay, Garrett, I am going to be totally honest with you. I found this to be a challenging topic. I'm not going to lie. And the reason why I even had this topic on my list was because an editor had it on their wish list, their manuscript wish list. And so I was like, I want to better understand Gonzo Fiction. So for my icebreaker today with you, the best related icebreaker I can come up with is, what is the most surreal thing that you could say you've experienced?
Oh gosh, the most surreal thing that I've ever experienced, and I guess this kind of ties back in with Gonzo Fiction. I remember, so about 20, it's been 23 years since I've been back, but 24 years ago, I moved to Japan as an exchange student, and I was there through Rotary, and Rotary has 4 Ds that you're not allowed to cross as a student: no dating, no driving, no drinking, no drugs. Um, I did not do I did not break the dating rule. I did not break the drugs rule. I'm not big on drugs. I did drive,
Okay.
but the big one was drinking. I met up with some friends once for we went to a bar that was owned by some Australians near the train station. Went there, I blended in, got a free beer, cool. But then, like, I went to a conference several months into my stay, and we were in this hotel, a beautiful hotel. They had an onsen, and if you're not familiar with those are the Japanese hot springs. And then after we, like, all the students, we had this huge party with pizza and snacks and food and all sorts of stuff, while the Rotary members were off doing their own party, which involved heavy drinking and smoking.
Okay. I feel like that's a requirement for Gonzo Fiction, but keep going.
Yeah. So as we were told, we need to go back up to our rooms and everything and settle in.
Mhm.
The party just kind of, for us, kind of carried over. But if you've never been to Japan and you've only heard the rumors, it is true that they have vending machines for darn near everything.
Okay.
And literally right next to my hotel room door was a vending machine that popped out beer and whiskey.
Okay.
And you could get like a 4 ounce beer for like $1.20.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, super cheap. We cleared out the vending machine. Now,
Seems
it
about right.
started with me just having one itty bitty little beer, and then people kept
Mhm.
coming up to me and having me finish off whatever they were drinking. And all I remember at one point, really my only memory from that is being on a phone call with my parents.
Oh, wow. You drunk dialed them?
No, they called me.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I don't remember why. I remember chatting up a girl from Hungary and talking about why dolphins and humans are the only species on the planet that have sex for pleasure. And then I remember telling everybody, I'm taking off my shoes to go to sleep. Please don't mess with me. And that's it.
Wow.
The next thing I know, I'm waking up. I have missed breakfast. My head is pounding. And despite the fact that I want to throw up, there's nothing in my stomach to throw up because my body has metabolized everything.
Because you're young and body's back, like when you're young, metabolizes everything so fast, or how did you do that?
I don't remember, but it like the worst headache I've ever encountered ever. And everybody knew. Like, I showed up for lunch and people are like, they're just looking at me.
All
I just
right.
sit down, I eat all the rice and sashimi I can possibly stomach, and I don't feel better until about maybe 4 o'clock that afternoon, about 6 hours or so after I had woken up. When we're on the Shinkansen, the bullet train going back.
Oh, wow. You didn't get in trouble for that?
Should have, did not.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you fit the bill for what this topic is about.
It's a lot. Yeah.
And you could probably speak from direct experience. All right, Garrett, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and
Yeah.
projects that you're currently working on?
Yeah. My name is Garrett K. Jones. I'm an independent author. Mostly I do fantasy work, but I currently have a series of five novels and an ongoing fantasy series called The Archives of the Sink Ran. And then um, I am currently a co-host on the War of the Stars podcast. It's a Star Wars podcast. And then I host a YouTube channel, and the show on that is called The Right Way, where we talk book recommendations, author interviews, and creative writing tips.
Very cool, very cool. And what drew you to this topic of Gonzo fiction?
You were looking for when you were looking for guests to come on, and you had a list of topics. This seemed to be the only thing that I knew anything about, sort
Okay.
of.
Really? Okay. From
And
experience. No, no.
uh, not so much from the experience, but I interviewed an author a couple of years ago who
Mhm.
writes this kind of stuff. He's a big, huge fan of Hunter S. Thompson, and so I liked. I thought this would be a fun discussion because it would help me know a little bit more about it, and so I jumped at the chance.
Yeah. I'm excited to talk about this too. Like I said earlier, an editor had it as their manuscript wish list, and I kind of wanted to get a better grasp on the definition. Even in my research for it, I was also like, okay, what exactly still, what is this? And it's like, you know it when you see it kind of thing, even to the point where I'm trying to pick, you could see I have the episode art right here and
Yeah.
trying to pick the most surreal picture I could find. It's a royalty free image. Just like, okay, how exactly do you capture this? So, how would you, from reading, interviewing that author, your exposure to Gonzo fiction, how would you define it?
I mean, a lot of it would be definitely like in that vein of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or the Rum Diaries, as we kind of mentioned before we recorded. But like it's just a lot of weird, bizarre stuff. Like it can fall into, I guess, contemporary fiction or even like sci-fi or fantasy. But there's usually some element where I guess everything is colored by the narrator's perspective because they are it's that their first person perspective. Um, but and I think that allows for a lot of opportunity to play with unreliable narrators because, for example, I mean, before we jumped in on this, we you mentioned Fight Club
Hmm.
by Chuck Palahniuk, and Fight Club is like my only exposure to Fight Club is the film from 1999. I love the film. I thought it was great. Haven't really watched it since it hit home video, so you can see how long it's been for me. But
Hmm.
the what I liked is that like as a film, it works very well because you get that sense of the unreliable narrator straight from the start,
Hmm.
and you there's so much going on, and trying to track it and follow it, and nothing really culminates until the very end when the main character, the narrator, who goes unnamed for the majority of the story, finally has this realization of everything that's been happening. That Tyler Durden is just a figment of his imagination.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting talking about this now, the timing of this right now, because yes, when you look at the breakdown of what seems to fit the bill for a Gonzo fiction, you've got, like you said, first person narrative, exaggeration and satire, blurring of fact and fiction, and a stream of consciousness to it. And in addition to talking about Fight Club, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Rum Diary, American Psycho, which I haven't finished reading yet because I don't have enough time in a day to do all the things I want to do. But American Psycho, the book itself is very
Oh
Gonzo
yeah.
fiction. It fits all of those, especially because you can't tell what the heck is going on. The stream of consciousness is so apparent. So when we talk about having an active participant for the narrator, how do you think this impacts readers who are reading that story?
Um, I think it leaves them questioning it. For one, it leaves the story open ended. Like, yeah, the story may come to a close. There's a culmination of plot threads, but I think what it does is it opens the reader up to interpreting the story from beginning to end for themselves. Um, with for, like um like for example, jumping back into Fight Club, was the narrator Tyler Durden all along, or was Tyler
Mm.
Durden a persona that he put on? What, was he the kind of person who would deliberately harm himself, or is he literally legitimately crazy? What's happening? Because like for example, you take I'm kind of jumping genres here, but you look at a character like the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
Descriptions of him on official, you know, character profiles and stuff like that have him listed as being super sane. While he is crazy, he's a homicidal maniac. Um, he is so sane that he knows exactly what he's doing and he enjoys every moment of it. It goes beyond psychopathy, it goes beyond sociopathy. Whereas, uh, so when you apply that kind of a lens to a character like Tyler Durden or the narrator from Fight Club, you're wondering who the real personality is, which one was the mask, which one was the true personality, and how is the person crazy, or are they super sane? They're finally coming to grips with that level of sanity.
So let's visit your epic night in Japan.
Okay.
How can you approach that narratively to make it gonzo?
Well, obviously, right from the start, there's that unreliable narrator quality because, like, I'm missing whole chunks of time. Like, I'm sure if I really started digging in, I started like looking at my day from beginning to end and wrote out like a list of events, I could probably piece everything back together, and be like, okay, this is exactly how things played out. But you know like the conversations I was having with, for example, the Hungarian girl, or some of the other conversations that I may or may not recall, like those are all of those are going to be colored by my perspective of what I think I remember versus what may have actually happened. Because if you were to ask someone else who was there, that's a completely different perspective.
Hmm.
Um, and if you're just like if you're the fly on the wall camera for like your third person omniscient narrator, it's not going to have that same coloring. Um, I had a similar, not exactly the same situation, but I had a similar point in my freshman year of high school where I was missing time. I was up at summer camp one year and I got clobbered.
Oh.
I'm sure I hit my head, but a couple of guys, like there's a whole chunk of time, like there's hours of time. Like I remember, like we were doing some kind of nighttime activity. I remember being out in the campground doing like just walking by myself, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in my bunk in the clothes from the night before, covered in dirt. My sleeping bag's on the floor, pillows are on the floor. I have no memory of anything that happened between the time I went out into the woods until the time I woke up.
Oh, wow.
And I spent, and this was like the very first full day that we were there, and I don't remember any of that. Like I had a couple friends tell me and fill in some gaps, and I had our cabin leader fill in some gaps for me. Although he was really reluctant to do so because he thought I was trying to get information because he thought I was going to try and do something to seek vengeance or something. I don't know. I'm just like, dude, I'm missing time. This is weird
That's
for
so
me.
scary. You could have died if you got hit that hard.
Well, and the funny thing was, is people found me out in the out in the I was by the campfire, the campground's fire pit, and like they walked me back to the cabin, or they walked me to the nurse's station. I don't remember that. They walked me back to the cabin. At some point, I ran out of the cabin screaming, and they walked me back to the nurse's station to get checked out. I was fine.
Do you know why
They
you were
wa-
running screaming?
The only thing I can think of is maybe I saw the kid who hit me because the kid was in my cabin.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so, like, it was so bizarre, so surreal, and so like that, like from a storytelling perspective, like I could use that framework of the missing time from high school and throw that in with my missing time of what happened in between the events. But then, like I can contrast them saying, well, this happened because I got punched in the face really freaking hard. This one happened because I decided to drink way too much, fermented bread.
Well, and what I think is interesting too is when writers combine that first person twisted reality with almost casual observations of the other characters, which will inform the reader what may
Yeah.
or may not actually happen. There's a book I read. I've quoted it several times on this podcast because it's affected me. It's called Perfect Days. Now I'm forgetting the author, but it's about a psychopath who basically kidnaps a girl, and it follows all the traditional beats of a romantic comedy, except it's this horror. And one of the things that he does, it's a very it's a terrible scene, but in his head, he thinks he's having an intimate love scene with her. And it's like for the reader, you're like, that's weird because every action and everything we've observed up to this point does not inform or lead to an intimate love scene. But then after the intimate love scene, he has this passive observation of her basically trying to beat up the pillow, trying to beat up the bed and just like freaking out and then leaving the room. So the reader immediately goes, that was not an intimate love scene for her. But the
Yeah.
the very fixed narration, to me, it's super powerful when there's some media literacy kind of baked into it, right? Like the
Yeah.
author knows to kind of present those two perspectives in such a way, but the reader also has to be open to critically thinking and recognizing those differences.
Yeah. That kind of gets me thinking about there was an episode of Batman the Animated Series from the 90s. And it's the whole story is told from the perspective of Harley Quinn. It's how she and the Joker connected.
I think I
So
saw
like
this. Okay, yeah.
it's called Mad Love,
Uh-huh.
and it's about how she goes from being a uh, a psychiatrist at Arkham to and working specifically with the Joker and trying to counsel him and try to work him through therapy. And the entire time he's working her, she has no idea.
Mm,
And it's colored from that whole perspective. And ultimately it shows just how abusive that relationship is between the Joker and Harley. But you see it from her perspective and the whirlwind romance that she thinks she's embarking on with him, and really he's using her the entire time. He's never cared, and that's just kind of how it is. And you see some of that in the 2016 Suicide Squad movie,
hmm.
although they play up the romance far more, especially toward the end when the Joker shows up and like rescues her. Joker would not have done that. There's an entire episode from that same, I think it's the same season too of the show, where like Joker goes to an arms deal and kills everybody, or at least, scares everybody away, and he steals an atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And he plans on detonating it in the middle of Gotham. And like he doesn't give any forethought. He doesn't rescue her from Arkham. She has to help Batman, and it really leaves her ticked off.
That was such a fantastic show. I remember watching that after school.
Yeah, me
So well
too.
done, because it really impacts some dark themes, some really dark themes in like a kid-friendly approach. But I don't know, I just thought it was fantastic. Okay, Gonzo fiction can be used to tell rebellious and confrontational stories. So, in your view, what kind of themes do you think serve Gonzo fiction best?
I think a coming of age story is always usually best, or some kind of a road trip. Like, I mean, Hunter S. Thompson, you look at Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the whole thing's a road trip, but
Mhm.
it's a road trip, told from the perspective of someone who's completely high on acid. And like, I've only seen bits and pieces of the film, but I think it was kind of interesting that um, the like the only scene I remember is like the scene where they're screaming about bats, and there's no bats. There's nothing. It's like they're tweaking out, and there's nothing actually happening to them. Um, and so, um, you have these moments where things can be very surreal. I think another example that would work very well in that is if you've ever seen either of the two good Harold and Kumar movies,
Mhm.
um, because I know there was a third Christmas one that I'm just like, no, sorry. But also the 2004 film Euro Trip lends
Mhm.
itself to a little bit of a, because there's a lot of alcohol use, a lot of drug use, um, uh, there's one particular episode where they're in Bratislava and they're all drinking absinthe and they're all super hallucinating. Which, like, if you actually do your research on absinthe, it's not the hallucinogen that everyone makes it out to be. It's very, very normal.
It's a
It's just
normal level of hallucinating.
no, like it's a very normal liqueur. Like it
Oh,
tastes
okay.
like black licorice. It doesn't have. I mean, it's. I don't know why people like it. I mean, if you like black licorice, cool, great. Not for me. Um, and it just had a bad rap because of one point in its historical development. But like, yeah, the whole scene, the episode, uh, or the whole sequence goes, off the wall because like two of the characters are twins, brother and sister, and two of the other guys are like, "Hey, look, hey, Jamie's finally met a girl. Great!" They turn around and it's him kissing his own sister,
Oh.
and it's just like,
Oh.
"Oh, that ain't right. That's not right." And they play it up for laughs because they've been tripping whatever it is that they
Yeah.
think they're hallucinating on with absinthe. But yeah, that's kind of how it plays out.
That makes me think of a Wolf of Wall Street. There are several. Well, one that stands out to me the most as far as Gonzo-esque is when he's having his big breakdown, and in his view, he goes down the stairs just fine. He drives just fine to his house. He's fully. I can't remember if he's just on drugs. He's on drugs and drinking, all the things. His life's kind of falling apart, and but then when the cameraman goes back and shows you what actually happened, you find out that he could barely get down the stairs, that when he got in the car, he was wrecking it along the way to his house. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of cool to kind of see, what the main character thought through his very narrowed viewpoint versus the
Yeah.
reality of it.
Well, and I think if you look at Todd Todd Phillips as a film director has a history of making films that kind of fall in line with it. I mean, you look at the three Hangover movies; each one of them is one Gonzo adventure after another.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the same formula over and over again, but it's like it tweaks and changes and stuff like that. It gets because like there's a lot of gaps. There's the missing time. There's the unreliable narrator element because like you want to like these guys, but none of these guys are likable. I mean, I watched I watched a video on YouTube once. It was doing a breakdown of the main three characters from the Hangover series, and like each one of them represents the id, ego, and superego.
Oh, okay.
It- at least it can be applied like that. But like, I mean, you look at these characters. Like Alan is like he roofies his friends, he drugs his friends on a regular basis without their consent,
Mm-hmm.
gets them into all sorts of shenanigans. Um, like the Stu, the Ed Helms character, like he is constantly like he is super repressed, and the moment he goes off the rails, he does something insane. Like he pulls out a tooth, or he gets a tattoo on the
Yeah.
side of his face, or the end of the third one, he has breast implants or something. Like he does really really crazy stuff because he has repressed all this other stuff, and then he goes off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bradley Cooper's character, like while he seems to be the most level, like the even keel of the three characters, he still has his own moments because like he's a family guy, he's got a wife, he's got a kids at home, but he's willing to go to Vegas and just get you know completely crazed drunk or whatever, and it doesn't seem to phase him. It's
Mm-hmm.
like what you learn about him in the very beginning of the movie is that he's a school teacher. Like if that was his history of how he behaves outside of school, I would have fired him.
Yeah, that is very true. He's kind of the opportunistic bad boy with a very traditional kind of good guy
Yeah,
face, I guess you can say.
yeah.
All right, so let's talk structure in writing Gonzo fiction. Because Gonzo fiction seems to take on a super creative lens, how do you think writers can approach narrative structure? And are there certain techniques that they can use to keep the reader kind of engaged or on track?
Hmm. Um, I think I think one of the I think one of the ways that gets used a lot, especially in film, and I guess you could see it in in books as well, like in print, is flashback sequences, like how things are viewed from one perspective when in reality they're happening a completely different way. Um, a great example of this is um, going back to what you mentioned with Wolf of Wall Street. The character views, because a lot of the times you have a story like this, the narrator or the main character, since it's their POV, they're viewing everything as if it's happening to them or because of them. They're the main character of their story, and everyone else is just a side character. And so you have these moments where in the flashback or in the moment things look a certain way, but the flashback shows a different perspective.
Hmm.
Um, Referencing Todd Phillips again, you take a look at the first Joker. That film was as hard as it can be to watch, especially with some of the subject matter. There are moments in the film where you see things a certain way, and like, for example, the interaction between Zazie Beetz' character and Joaquin Phoenix. It looks like they're becoming friends, like they're starting a romance, and then you get to this point where he shows up in her apartment and she's freaking out, and you get that moment where it's like, oh, this has all been happening in his head.
Hmm.
And it's heartbreaking as the audience member to see that, because you can see just how unwell he is, and that goes even beyond the violence, that goes beyond uh the other issues that he deals with. And so I think having those flashbacks or using a different storytelling lens can help. Christopher Nolan does this very well in the movie Memento.
Hmm.
While I don't know if it necessarily quantifies as Gonzo fiction, there is kind of a Gonzo element because it's all told from the perspective of Guy Pearce's character, and like he's a character that has breaks in his memory. His short term memory is shot, so you could have a conversation with him, and 10 minutes later he won't remember it.
Hmm.
And what they do to structure the story is they use the story actually the start of the story is actually in the middle, and it's kind of interesting because the scenes that are taking place at the beginning of the story are all the scenes that are in black and white. Everything that's in color actually picks up in the middle of the story and moves forward. So you have these two different timelines, and eventually they coalesce, but it's one of those neat little things that Nolan does with the storytelling and with the filmmaking, that you question what's going on. You question it starts to put the audience into the mindset of the main character.
Is it a prerequisite in a Gonzo fiction for the main character to be kind of struggling?
Um, I don't necessarily think it needs to. I mean, the characters don't necessarily need to struggle. I mean, having a little bit of difficulty or challenge helps develop the character. I'm going to jump back into talking about Eurotrip for just a moment. I mean, the whole impetus of the story is the main character Scotty. His whole perspective of like love and romance and stuff like that gets really skewed because he finds out that his girlfriend's been cheating on him like all 4 years of high school. Um, and it becomes this surrealist thing because like the guy that she's been hooking up with is played by Matt Damon in a really funny cameo playing this band guy,
Yeah.
and like the song that they sing at this party becomes this like hit song in Europe, and they keep finding versions of it everywhere they go. But like, uh, the things that happen to them, some of the struggles that they have, like the weird dude played by Fred Armisen on the train, or the drunken night in Bratislava, or all the things that they have to do going through Rome to meet the German girl that he wants to meet. Like all these little challenges, they're obstacles that help. They kind of help drive the plot, but they help give you a sense of the character, whether for good or bad, or for however realistic it may be. It's I mean, it's one of those those moments where like every challenge or every obstacle he comes across is something that allows you to see what kind of a person he's going to become. And like he get like what's funny is like his buddy who's hanging out, like every time he responds he's like, oh yeah, it's super easy, like Europe is like the size of the mall, we can get there in just a few hours. No,
Mm.
like, it's like you have no idea what you're talking about. And like the entire time, like it's really kind of funny how things are pieced together, like as far as raunchy teen comedies and stuff like that came out back, especially like the early 90s. There's a lot of comedies that came out where there's very little to no plot.
Mm.
And yet and yet this is one of those few comedies where like the plot is actually decent and makes sense, and the humor is funny despite the raunch to it. Whereas you take a film like Super Troopers, the original film at least, that film is very Gonzo related because of all the drug and alcohol use. And there's no plot for like the first half of the movie. The first half of the movie feels like a bunch of like really funny skits that are just threaded together, and the plot doesn't come up until about halfway through.
So I feel like that segues well into this next question, which is humor, absurdity, and satire are central to many Gonzo works. So how do you see these elements shaping stories, and how do you think it can impact the reader?
Um, I I think it gives the reader an opportunity to laugh at stuff, because like satire is great for poking fun at the reality of what we're dealing with. Um, I mean, just look at I mean, The Simpsons has been on the air for over 30 years. Um, the South Park has been on the air for over 20. And what's really fun about both of those series is that they use satire very, very well. I think Simpsons has gotten a little long in the tooth, and I haven't watched it in recent years. But like one of the things that South Park especially has done well is they take a look at hot button topics and conversation points, and they make whole episodes based on someone completely misapplying whatever lesson sociopolitics is trying to teach to the
Mhm.
rest of the world. And when you look at it from the lens that they're showing, you're like, dude, this is really ridiculously stupid, and it's funny. I mean, like for example, I mean, I'm not Catholic, and I'm not bagging on anybody who is, but like in Eurotrip, there's this minor plot point where they accidentally set the Pope's hat on fire,
Mm.
and they stuff it in a chimney, and it creates white smoke, which is or yeah, white smoke, which is indicative of the Pope dying or something like that, or maybe it's black smoke. I don't remember. But then something else happens where white smoke comes out, and you know they're like, oh, they've already selected a new pope, that's great. And
Yeah.
everyone in Rome at the Vatican's cheering, and then all of a sudden the main character comes out like covered in drapes and a pope hat, and they think he's the new pope, and he's like, what the crap.
I actually really, okay, I will say movies back then in the last, 10, 20 years were really absurd, really funny, really daring, really trying to get you to like question societal norms and,
Mm-hmm.
examine it. Do you see that continuing today?
um I think it's harder to do today, um just because, for example, one of my one I think we had this conversation last time I was on your show, but I pull a lot from film. I'm very visual when it comes to the references I make, and part of that is because of my background doing film review. But one of my favorite movies is Tropic Thunder. Tropic Thunder is a movie that could not be made today because too many people would be offended. And I put a caveat on this that they would be not offended because they are impacted by it, but they're offended for somebody else. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with media today, whether it's film, theater, television, books, you name it. Someone is going to be offended by something that someone says or does in that environment. Um, Case in point, a friend of mine who is a really awesome writer. He just had a new book come out, and he got a recently negative review. It's like one of the only negative reviews he's getting on the new book. But they talk about how you can definitely tell his main character, who is a woman, is written by a man, and just goes into all this negative talk about how how it's written. But like guy and male authors get so much flack for how they write female characters, but then you look at books written by women like Stephanie Meyer or E.L. James, and I highlight those because E.L. James wrote her books as fan fiction of Twilight.
Yeah.
But you look at the way that they write male characters, and those male characters have even less agency than the female characters. They are meant to serve a purpose, and it's not a good purpose. They're there to fawn over the female character in a way that is incredibly unhealthy. And you see that a lot, especially in romance books. Like I had a negative review on my first book in the last year, and the person dinged me because there was not enough spice in my romance. Well, yeah, that's because I'm not writing smut with dragons. I'm writing hardcore fantasy, and there's a few romantic scenes, yes, but that's not the core focus of the story. If that was, it would be there.
That is definitely something that I think I see a lot of writers struggling with, and I know about it because they share it in the social media space. The relationship with the reader and the idea. I was told by someone once that the reviews are not for you, so don't look at them, because it is there. Yeah, there's so many different people out there with different perspectives and different even agendas and different, you know what I mean, just reactions.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting how as a writer you have a control over your story, and then the minute it gets published, the control is handed over. You
Yeah.
know,
At
how
least the control of the response is handed over, I
yes,
would say.
yeah. And now it's just it's hearing what readers have to say and finding opportunities to clarify, but it's kind of like I haven't published, my book is currently in submission, so I haven't entered that realm yet. And I've been trying to mentally prepare myself because I've seen so many authors go through it and trying to figure out, okay, what is going to be my game plan? Because no matter what you do, and you said exactly it, someone's going to be offended by something that you write, whether or whether or not intentionally. And I just think back to when books were intentionally trying to offend, right?
Right.
American Psycho is not trying to be peaceful. It is
No.
trying to elicit reactions. And I mean, that is a part of human nature. Like you can say that there are people that want to elicit reactions and it sparks conversations. And I will say I think there should be still space for that. The feeling of to be able to elicit reactions. But I'm also still scared when
Well,
it's my turn.
one of the things that I think really kind of annoys me is like more and more we have like media producers do not trust the audience, for one.
Okay.
And I say this because like more so than ever before, you're seeing trigger warnings for books, movies, television, stuff like that. And I mean, I think you and I are both uh, young enough to remember a time where that was never the case. You had rating warnings based on the content, but not trigger warnings based on things you would encounter in the content.
Hmm.
Because you just kind of assumed, well, yeah, this is going to be stuff that I'm going to see. Um, and I had someone recently ask me about my thoughts on trigger warnings in books, and I don't put anything like that in my books. And the reason being is because the point of fiction is to elicit an emotional response, whether it's a negative response, a positive response, or something in between. Case in point, you look at Game of Thrones. So many characters are beloved that it sucks when they die. It's heartbreaking, and a lot of them die. Probably more so, I think, in the show than in the books. But you look at a character like Joffrey Baratheon, who is universally despised, and he goes for ages without being reprimanded. Without, I mean, like the best we get is when he gets slapped across the face by Tyrion. That is cathartic for us as the audience because we hate this character. He is an awful character. And so when he finally dies at the at his wedding, he's choking on that poison. That is again another moment of catharsis. Now, yes, there might be someone who may have experienced food poisoning, or they may have experienced an allergic reaction. They don't need a trigger warning about that. And yet, someone in today's society will be like, "Oh, that scene needs a trigger warning for someone who probably choked on an apple once." Mm. That being said, I do think it's good when authors are conscientious about what their readers might encounter. But at the same time, if you have been set, I mean, if they know going in what to expect as far as especially with the genre, it's unnecessary to say, here's a list of every little nitpicking thing that people might have a problem with. And I think because, like, going back to what I said about Tropic Thunder being a film not being able to be made in this day and age, that's because people would want to have that list of every little thing that could potentially offend somebody. And it's like the whole point of that film was to offend. That whole movie was making fun of the industry of which it was taking part in. Mm-hmm. It was making fun of the film industry. It was making fun of the producers, the directors, the whiny actors who became prima donnas because they were an action star or a really funny comedian, or they were that Oscar bait, thespian. And that's the whole point. And it's like, I think it is. There's again, referencing Batman the Animated Series, there's an episode where someone doesn't get the joke that the Joker's making. They don't get the point, and he's like, "You've completely missed the point," and he beats them up because of it, because he had to explain the joke. Mm. You have to explain the joke. Oh, I remember who it was. I think it was in that same episode of Mad Love where she kidnaps Batman, hangs him upside down over a shark tank, because sharks don't look like they're smiling, they look like they're frowning. But if he's upside down, it looks like a smile. And so she had to explain the joke, and that's what pisses him off. And so he beats her because of it. Oh. Now, I'm not advocating for that by any means, but that kind of ties back into the idea of satire. Is like, if you have to explain it to your audience so they aren't offended, they are the ones not getting the joke.
I've been seeing some pretty healthy conversation right now in light of Agatha All Along. Have you stayed up to date on that one?
I have not. In fact, it's kind of funny. Of all the MCU projects that have been put out between the start of the MCU and now, it's the only one that I have had zero interest in, just because I felt like it was an unnecessary spinoff. And that's just more from like a storytelling perspective. Yeah. But I've heard some good things from people that I know that have watched it. So now that it's done, I'm tempted to jump in and watch. But
I think it's worth the watch now that it's all there because I will say I had a different impression of what I thought it was becoming, what it was going to be. And then when it got the chance to breathe and show you where it was going, now the rewatch is even better. But what there's a lot of okay, here's what I appreciated about it. It didn't go out of its way to explain every little thing. And actually some of the storytelling methods it used was it kind of expected the viewer to kind of do some thinking themselves, right? So, for
Mhm.
example, Death takes one character over the I don't know the bridge or whatever and takes him away, and there one person goes, "Why didn't we get to see her do all of them?" And I'm like, "Well, there wasn't a story reason why. They only needed to show you once to establish." Okay, what does that character do? So that when that character appears again later, we've got the foundation.
Right.
And so I think I appreciated that because it felt like we were back to like, all right, I felt like the people in charge of the story were in charge of the story. We're not necessarily kind of spoon feeding every little thing because what ended up happening to a lot of people on TikTok, they're like, wait, this didn't get answered, and this didn't get answered, and this didn't get answered. And then people started writing in the comments, tell me you don't have media literacy without telling me you don't have media literacy. It's like,
Right.
these are things that you should be analyzing and kind of like, you don't need to have every single thing explained. There's things that could be implied or there's
Yeah.
purposeful nuance.
Yeah, and I think that's a good like that. I think that part of that ties into a larger issue with the MCU, where especially as we got into Phase 4 and dealing with like the multiversal type stuff, everyone kept assuming that there's this one character Mephisto who's going to be showing up, and it's like, and so like when those expectations aren't met for some reason, like they were like nitpicking every single little potential thing for a clue, and when that thing doesn't pan out to what they expect, they're like, well, why did this happen?
Yeah, trash. The whole show's trash because it
Right.
didn't fit. Yeah.
Whereas I'm the kind of person where like I will, when I'm looking at it, like talking about another technically a Disney property, like everyone complained about the Acolyte and that Star Wars put out, and I didn't like it just for the sheer fact that the storytelling doesn't make a damn bit of sense. You have you have character motivations that change on a dime. You have characters that can't tell which character they're actually talking to or should be talking to. You have character interactions and conversations that don't make any sense, uh, and decisions that don't make any sense. One of my biggest beefs, and I talked about this on War of the Stars, that I had with that show is that, like, for example, there is a scene at the very beginning of the show where the by this point I don't think I need to say spoiler alert because people know, but like um, Amanda Stenberg's playing two different characters, twins. The good twin, or the character that's portrayed initially as the good twin, like she's like light years away from anything that happened at the very onset of the episode, the very impetus of the episode. There are people that can track where she has been, whether or not she's used the starship, whether she's been off space station or whatever it is that she is, and not doing her job because she's being paid to be an engineer, to be a technical worker. There are people that keep track of those things. And if she was gone for any length of time, they would know it. Nobody bothers to check those records. The Jedi investigation is ridiculously stupid. They're like, well, we have this one eyewitness who saw you. How does she not remember she has a twin sister until 3 episodes later? Then they take, instead of like she's a person she's a person of interest in this investigation, rather than taking her directly back to the temple for questioning and to explore this in detail, they put her on a completely separate ship for prison transport without having a trial, without having anything, without a proper investigation. And it goes in one direction. The Jedi go back to the temple, and because of the crash, because they did not ensure that the prison transport did not go where it was supposed to go, they send people back. This is the equivalent of flying out from California to New York, sending someone to Canada, and then flying back to California, and then being like, "Oh, we kind of screwed up there. Let's go back to New York," and then jumping to Canada. It doesn't make sense.
Well, Garrett, I'm sure if anyone is really intrigued to learn more about your Star Wars views, they should definitely check out your podcast. What was it called again?
War of the Stars.
War of the Stars. Okay, we're coming up on time. So, for Gonzo Fiction, do you have any final remarks or advice for writers that want to learn how to explore new horizons and maybe piss off their readers? Or, you know?
I think one of the best things you can do is learn how to write for unreliable narrators, which I think if I recall, the last time I was on your show, that's what we talked about is unreliable narrators.
Mhm.
But yeah, unreliable narrators are good. You can play around with them because they can either be the hero, they could be the villain, they could be something else, completely different. Um, you play around with that, have fun with the character because then um, the more you have fun with it, the more the readers are going to enjoy what you've done. But also play around with um, not just the structure, but the chronology of your character, of what's going on in your story. Because like you play around with the chronology of what's happening, it makes it intriguing for the reader to pick up those pieces. The friend that I mentioned earlier with the new book that just came out, Calvin Ellis, his new book does that very well. I'm not going to drop any spoilers because it's a brand new book and I want people to read it because I think it's an awesome book. Like I read it in 3 days, like could not put it down. But he plays with that, and so like there are sequences where you think it's happening in real time with the rest of the story, and it's not.
Mm.
And it took me. I was about maybe 2/3 of the way through the book when I finally picked up on that, and he's like, "Oh, good, you picked up on it right when I was hoping you would." I'm like, "Sweet."
That's nice.
And so
Wow. That's
I
cool.
like I like having those kinds of stories. And so like if you're a fan of Christopher Nolan, he does that a lot. He plays with time a lot.
Very cool. All right. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for joining us. How can people find you?
You guys can find me on a couple of ways. First and foremost, my website is archivesofthe5kingdoms.com. There you'll learn everything about my books. There's an author bio. And there's links, obviously, to all my other ways, but social media, I'm predominantly on Instagram at GKJ_publishing. You can also use the same handle for X. And then on YouTube, you can find me just by searching GKJ Publishing in the search bar on YouTube. As far as War of the Stars, we're part of a network called Feast of Fandoms. So if you just type in a search for Feast of Fandoms, you'll find us.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Listeners, I'll get back with a new episode next week. Bye.